Welcome to the Autism Outreach Podcast. I'm your host, Rose Griffin, and boy, do we have a great show for you today. I get emails oftentimes from speech therapists saying, Rose, I'm not sure where to start with my student because they are not yet speaking, they are autistic, and they're not engaging in assessment type tasks. Today, we really break down where to get started in intervention with your students. So whether you're working with younger students or you're working with school-age students, this is a great episode to help you get unstuck, to help you understand what is that framework? How can I help my student start communicating? How can I help them find their voice? And I love that Terri Smith, that is the speech therapist that I interviewed in this episode, she says you have to bring the fun. I love that. I want to say it again. You have to bring the fun. That is one of the highlights of this talk. But we really break down, what skills should we work on with our students? I was so distraught when I first started working in the field because I felt like I wasn't reaching my students. And Terri really, she felt the same way. And she started learning about different ways to reach her students. She found our ABA speech, Help Me Find My Voice course. And it's just been really amazing that she's been able to apply this and transform her services and really, really help her clients. She's doing such great work. She's a speech therapist and the founder and owner of Bluebird Speech Therapy and Consulting Services. She also is working with Infinity Center for Behavior Services in Maryland. And she also has a really cool position where she is supporting speech therapists and acting as a guide and support for them in learning in their own journey and how to support autistic learners. I am beyond excited for this episode, and I just can't wait to dig on in.
You're listening to Autism Outreach Podcast, a podcast full of ready-to-use strategies to help those with autism strengthen their communication skills. Here's your host, Rose Griffin of ABA Speech, a speech therapist and board-certified behavior analyst who shares tips you can use in your next therapy session.
Thanks so much for joining us on episode 57 of the podcast. We have an amazing episode today. We have with us Terri Smith. Thank you so much for joining us, Terri. It's so nice to officially meet you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's wonderful to meet you too, Rose.
And Terri, you have been in some of my courses, and I know that we've just kind of corresponded, and you're in our ABA speech community. And then I was actually reading your bio. We have like a shared kind of mutual friend. And I was like, I didn't know she knows so-and-so. And it's just, it's actually a very small world out there in the autism world. So, but you're doing such amazing things in your career. Can you tell everybody just a little bit about you, kind of your SLP journey, what you're up to now, because you really kind of have like a really cool gig that you're doing, kind of putting together some different positions. And it just sounds really fascinating.
Yeah, thank you. It really is. I really love my job right now. It gives me a lot of variety, keeps me nice in touch with the kids, doing my direct service and then also helping other SLPs. But so speech-language pathology was actually a second career for me. I went back to school in my 30s, was having my first child, and I got my bachelor's and my master's degree. And then beyond that, I really have just had a lot of training and education, mostly in behavioral technologies, which I, have really, really enjoyed learning all of that. And it's just helped me so much with my students. I worked full-time for the public school system in my area, Harford County Public Schools. That's in Bel Air, Maryland, as a speech-language pathologist. Until this past year, I actually resigned my full-time position and went part-time as an SLP leader in the county, supporting SLPs in our regional autism program. So, and also I ended up opening my own practice in March of 2020.
Woo!
I'm super excited about.
Yeah.
Bluebird Speech Therapy and Consulting Services. And I just kind of started doing it on the side. and ended up through our mutual friend getting a job at a place called Infinity Center for Behavior Services, where I work with preschoolers who have been diagnosed with autism. And I absolutely love working with them.
Yeah.
I work very closely with families and BCBAs. It's an amazing place. They have a center in Harford County, Maryland, where I am. And then they also have another center in Carroll County, Maryland. So it's really an amazing place and helping so many people.
Oh, that's really great. I mean, I love that because I know here in Ohio, before I started ABA speech, I always divided my time between a public school, which I'm still doing 3 days a week, and a non-public program or, ABA center. I usually say non-public program, but, and it really was just great that they have a speech therapist on staff because that's why, I like Kristen so much who you work with, because it's just a speech therapist needs to be on staff. I think that's why so many speech therapists and maybe BCBAs, there's a lot of not getting along. But, I also don't like it when I know I get a lot of questions from people about AAC devices or stuff that I do feel like we are the experts in. Yes. And I know that it's somebody who's behaviorally based and I can tell that there's not a speech therapist on staff and that kind of eats away at my soul. And so I definitely love that model of having a speech therapist because this is, this is what we do. And this is your second career. How amazing. I love that. So you are in it. You love this.
I'm in it. I love it. Yeah. And I agree, Siva. I have not had all of the BCBAs that I have worked with. And I've had great relationships with. And
that's great.
Yeah, and we collaborate and really work together for our students' program. So it's
great. And I like it when, you're part of that clinical team because I myself as a SLP BCBA have actually gotten into some disagreements with BCBAs coming into the school district as a consultant, trying to give me feedback on AAC and, just some different ideas. And I have some SLP BCBA friends that I vent to all the time on text, but, it's frustrating. So I think it's really great that, that it sounds like a really great center because they obviously, know that you have an expertise in this area and together we can do so much. That's why it's just absolutely exciting because I'm sure, especially with little ones, you're seeing such growth in their language and everything.
For sure. And I really think that it's just, the AAC piece and ABA, that has always been a very hot topic. It's always been somewhat controversial, and historically, I think that, SLPs and BCBAs have disagreed on things, but I feel like now in today's age and just the things that everyone's learning. And then the more and more, the highest, the prevalence of autism has grown so much that it's just so important for everybody to work together and figure out what are we going to do, for our students to help them be able to communicate and navigate their world a little bit better.
Yes, I love that. And that's what I always draw back on that because I'm probably online way too much. I need to put myself on a behavior plan and sometimes I do. But there's a lot of negativity out there. And that's really kind of why I started ABA speech. I really had this idea for the action builder cards, but then it morphed into building a bridge between speech therapists and BCBAs and, just trying to be positive. And I really just try to take the emotion out of, knowing that both sides, if it's, feeling that way, it's that everybody really does have the student's best interest in mind. And sometimes we have different ideas about what exactly that would look like. But, how did you find out about ABA speech? And I know you were in Help Me Find My Voice, our ASHA course, but I would love to know, I don't think we've gone down that path, but how did you find out about my company and all the resources and stuff?
Yeah, honestly, I feel like I've been following ABA speech for a long time now, many years. And I think I must have stumbled upon it just searching for evidence-based practice. In the program in the school system that I work in is a verbal behavior program.
Oh, yeah.
When I first started, I was completely lost and I had no idea what I was doing. So I really was on a very serious search for some really good things that could help me out. And, I may have come across it maybe through some things by Mary Barbera or, Dr. Barbara Esch. I see I may have seen some of things through that way. And then once I found you, I realized like, oh my goodness, this is like a complete gold mine of information. And everything was so relevant to what I was doing.
Yeah.
And I mean, between, I took a lot of free courses. I've watched a whole bunch of podcasts.
Oh, good.
And of course, the Help Me Find My Voice. And then I also recently took the preschooler course.
Oh, you did? Okay, great.
They were all phenomenal and,
great.
And helpful. And it's nice because, that you give us strategies that we can put to work right away. And maybe it's just something as simple as tweaking a variable here and there that maybe I hadn't thought of before. Mm-hmm. Oh, let me try this,
Right.
And I was watching something on the Facebook page. That's another really good thing. The private Facebook page that you have access after the course is such a wonderful support because everyone posts questions and you answer everyone's questions. And I love listening to the lives because even if I have to listen to them later, because most of the time questions on there are going to, be relevant to something I'm doing as well. So it's all been very, very helpful to my career.
Oh, good. I love that. And I love when people will reach out. And I think that's probably just how we started talking because you were always contributing to the community or maybe you emailed me or, but I love that because I just remember when I first started out in the field, there just wasn't a lot of information about the types of kids that I was trying to help, students who engaged in problem behavior that was a barrier. And, the students I was working with at the time were elementary and a little bit older. And it's just really difficult. And then working with, learning about ABA for the first time was like all new. And, it was just a whole new world. But I know Mary Barbera is a friend and a colleague of mine. So I remember when I lived in Austin, Texas, I had taken this autism facilitator job and I read her book and I was like, oh my gosh, this is so great. And then I heard Dr. Carbone talk, who is a really verbal behavior guru. And it all just kind of like worked in my brain. It kind of sounds like that's kind of what did it for you too. And you could see how it's helping your students and, just making such a difference. So I know that's what we were going to kind of share today or just, and it sounds like you're just helping in the field in such a cool way where you're like helping to support professionals, but you're also providing therapy. And so I know today we were going to talk about some strategies that have been helpful for you, or maybe that you're talking with your therapist about too, as far as, when students are not yet speaking, I feel like we're very overwhelmed and we just feel like, how do I know what to work on? Especially because sometimes, usually the students are not attending and you know what I mean, to therapy tasks. And, so can you talk to us a little bit about, like where do you begin or like what assessments you use and kind of how you have that roadmap of what to work on?
Sure. Well, I think the first thing is like, you have to bring the fun. You have to bring the fun, especially with our little guys, because it has to be motivating for the child to even want to interact with you. And that being said, I think child-led activities are also something that's really important, especially with my preschoolers that I work with, because, letting them choose what's mostly motivating for them and then kind of meshing my objectives into those activities has been very successful. Using that manding, requesting to increase that motivation to communicate, I think is really important, especially for our early learners that may not be speaking or are minimally vocal. You really have to kind of pull that out of them. They have to want to interact with you and have a reason to really communicate with you. So using that manding, especially in the very beginning, is really important. And then once you have the requesting, you can move on from there. That's really been what has been most successful to me, is working on that first and then moving on. I think also too is just remembering during your planning and everything with your student, remember what their developmental age is rather than their chronological age, because choosing goals and objectives and activities and things like that are really important to match up to the developmental age rather than their chronological age. You don't want to miss any of those really important building blocks, those foundational skills, and you don't want to work on things that they might not be developmentally ready for.
Mm-hmm. That's big, is because you can see too a lot of problem behavior when you're not working on the right thing. Like one of the times when I launched Help Me Find My Voice, I did coaching sessions, and one of the speech therapists I was talking to was seeing a student actually through teletherapy because it was during the pandemic. But, it was a student who didn't really communicate on their own spontaneously, but they were working on prepositions. And I just knew that probably wasn't the best choice just because of where the learner's skills were. So we talked through that because, the student wasn't attending, the sessions weren't going well. I love that idea of starting with requesting and now too I talk more a little bit about having shared activities. I mean, we could call it joint attention, but sometimes I'm talking with parents, so I just say shared activities, but building that connection and building rapport with your client is so, so important. I love the idea of requesting because that really shows students that their communication is powerful. And oftentimes we're working with students who don't have a voice yet, they're not able to communicate. They're not able to. And I wonder if you felt this way too, because I felt like once I learned about applied behavior analysis and then kind of, use my SLP brain and my BCBA brain, that my students were really responding. And it was students who were not responding to what I learned in graduate school. Did you feel that way too?
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. And that was one of the big things when I first started working in our autism program with the school system was I just thought, I am not ready for this. Like, I can't help them right now with the current skill set that I have, so that is really what led me to, researching so much. And our mutual friend, Kristen, was a big, big help to me then.
Yeah.
Mary Barbera's book was really the first book that I read. And then that kind of led me on to other things.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's just, you never stop learning and growing in this particular field because our students are all so different and their needs are so different. And you just are always constantly learning things about them and things that you can do, variables you can change in your therapy to help them be successful.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that, I just remember asking my supervisor when I was, my second year of being a speech therapist. I've almost been at this 20 years now, but I remember I was working in a non-public program and I used to always say, the kids were not jumping and skipping to therapy. They were just, they were older students and, they didn't have a way to communicate. So they were just upset and that's how they were kind of navigating their environment. And I remember talking to my supervisor and I felt defeated because I just felt like I wasn't reaching the student. And it wasn't like there was no online things back then. It was I don't know, I need to ask my colleagues, my friends. And, my supervisor just said, we'll work on joint attention. There was no step-by-step. This is what you should do. This is how you should plan a session. And I just felt really defeated, but knowing me, I'm very type A. So I just try to learn as much as I could. And I, try to really help my students. And I always kind of call that my autism boot camp. There after my CFY year, I worked in a non-public program for 3 years, but it really taught me how to think outside of the box and how to help those students who are so hard to help. And I know that I had a great graduate school program. I actually had one of my former professors on, Dr. Audette, but I just didn't feel ready when it came down to it. And I was in that therapy room with a student who was not yet speaking and was like 12. I didn't feel ready for that. So I think it's really great that you were able to, start learning and start applying. And then it kind of sounds like we're kind of similar where, I always was kind of choosing positions where once people knew I loved working with kids with autism, then it was like that has been my whole entire career, probably for the past 19 of the 20 years. So Yeah, it's just such a nice way to be able to specifically help your clients.
It really is. And the courses that I've taken from you, they have really been able to, they help me also in like my, working with the SLPs that I work with, because, it can help me help them, with the roadmaps and all of the things that you provide in those trainings. They're just very helpful. Me and my students, and then also in helping the SLPs that I work with, because I can give them some really good tips and things like that. I think that is a common feeling across SLPs that are kind of new to working with this population, that they do feel defeated. And, they're dealing with, behaviors and lack of a functional communication system and lack of joint attention. And like, what do we do? Like, where do we start? Mm-hmm. That's one nice thing. Well, many nice things that the Help Me Find My Voice gives to us, I think, clinicians and parents and everyone else that is working with a student with autism or a child with autism. Gives us that starting point. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think the thing with mandating and requesting is oftentimes on speech therapy assessments, it's not always assessed, or it's just like a very small portion, or it's really not assessed. And then I always say, well, your assessment typically drives your intervention and your goals. So oftentimes we're not even targeting that initiation, that requesting, and then the student doesn't understand that their communication is powerful, and we're kind of like missing the mark,
Absolutely. And that's one thing that has been helpful too. Like that you were talking a lot about, like, what assessments can we use when, a lot of speech and language assessments really aren't appropriate for our students. And just using those informal pieces, that's really what has been so helpful in identifying needs and strengths. And also, writing those IEP objectives.
Yes.
Yeah.
A lot of IEPs. Yeah, no, that's nice, because the informal screener, I added that to start communicating today. And then I added one to help me find my voice, because I think that's what's so hard, especially once students are school age. It's like, we have the functional communication profile, but if we don't do that, having an observation and using informal measures, I think that's the thing where people get so kind of overwhelmed. It's like, well, the student doesn't attend to evaluation tests. So where do we start? You know what I mean? And how do we get this ball rolling, and all those great things. So you said having a focus on requesting, you've seen that really helpful for your students. Any other tips or strategies or skills that you kind of are part of that framework for you?
Yeah, I think a big thing too, with our minimally vocal kids, I always want to make sure that people understand, not to be afraid of using like picture supports or AAC to support communication. I think many times, especially in that, in the ABA piece, that they feel like it's going to deter their vocal communication or communication, but know that that's not going to happen. And there's a lot of research out there to support that. And just using pictures sometimes can be the key to our students that, that may make it a lot easier for them to navigate their world, is learning through pictures rather than all of that bombardment of language all around them all the time.
Absolutely. I think that's good. Yeah. So using pictures, do you like within your sessions, and then also just kind of like as a total communication for the student?
Yeah, total communication really is what I focus on. I have students using really all forms. I have sign language, more dynamic display or devices like LAMP and touch chat and things like that. And then but I love picture supports because they're so readily available and you can make them pretty quickly. And then also, I like to make picture supports I use GoTalk a lot. And that is nice because you can take like real pictures of things and load them right onto a communication board. And that can be helpful as well. So I love using, really, I would say pictures and the GoTalk communication boards are probably the things that I use the most.
So GoTalk has, I don't have that. Is an app now? GoTalk has an app?
Yeah, it has an app now. And it's really, I think, getting more and more as far as how you can use it.
Okay.
You know, and I like it because it's just like I can be in a session and I can very quickly make a communication board if I see that I need one for something specific, even just activity specific or anything like that. I can make it really quickly while the student's taking like their reinforcer break or something. You know,
not like back in the day, where I had to have board maker and I had to, the icons had to line up and you'd have to print and laminate and shove it in there. And it was a whole, and then we would try to like get, you know, a lot of them, like I used to use a tech speak that was, you know, more like low tech, but we would always try to have because we did work, it was mostly boys that we were servicing, but we would try to have a male staff like do the voice to record it. So it had, you know, because it was like a real voice on there. So it wasn't a real quick kind of thing. I was like, I was doing it a long time ago. So it was a whole thing, but it's amazing now with the apps. I mean, I think it was as soon as Proloquo started, that just really, kind of changed. And I know LAMP has their, you know, PRC that's located here in Ohio. But it's
our lifespan, you know.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I like the one point you had made, though, about sometimes, because if you're really getting into the weeds of ABA centers and programming and all the things, you know, some people may say, well, if I show a student a picture and they point to and they press a button on their device, like if I show a picture of Apple and then they press Apple on their device, it's not really a label, it's a match. Right. And, you know, if this is too much for you, you know, turn it down for a second. But I mean, you know what I'm saying? Because you're in the thick of that. But I do think it's a good point to talk about how we as speech therapists, you know, and this is the thing, like I've gotten into discussions with BCBAs about language programming. And I think it's good for us to advocate for, you know, our level of expertise. I think that speech therapists, we obviously know so much about speech and language development and, you know, how is this functional? How are we going to generalize this? How is this functional for the natural environment? Like you said, the word generalization and, you know, across the lifespan. And that's always how I'm thinking about my kids because I do work with middle school and high schoolers. And so I do think that that is important to be able to advocate because I do think the one thing that BCBAs do a good job of is being very confident in their recommendations. Would you agree with that? They're very confident in the recommendations.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So I think that's important for speech therapists. You know, when you're working in the ABA center, it's like you really are an expert in the area of speech and language. And so I think it's good to have those, you know, professional dialogues because that's what's going to help each side of the table grow and learn. Like I've worked with OTs before and learned so much. And I've worked with BCBAs as the speech therapists and, you know, learned a lot and vice versa. But I do think that we can really learn from each other. It's about having that professional dialogue.
I completely agree. Yeah. You need to be willing to sit down with each other and just have an open mind and be flexible and understand, you know, our professions overlap in so many ways.
They do.
But there are areas that, you know, we may need to understand more about each other, and that's okay. You know, it's nice when you can find people that you can talk it out with and you can really just come down to, okay, like, let's decide what's going to be most important for my student, you know, and also, you know, teasing out, you were mentioning this, it really does get down into the weeds when you think about it. And when, you know, that whole fringe and core thing comes into play and you're really, you're to weed that, weed that out and see what's going to be best for your individual student. And that's really, I think, the advice that I give to the SLPs that I work with is like, you have to take each individual student and you have to look at what their needs are, what are their motivators, and then from there, you can kind of come up with what their personal vocabulary might be. It might be fringe, it might be core. Typically, it is a big mixture of both.
Mm-hmm.
But I do feel like early on, when you do have those students that, were having a really hard time finding any type of communication at all, we really need to focus on that manding and those high reinforcers.
Yeah. Yeah. And that is definitely the core versus fringe, right? I know everybody has an opinion on that. I always say, let's just take data and let's let the data decide. And honestly, I've been because I was an administrator for a couple of years, very contentious. I mean, as a speech therapist, I have been too with advocates and lawyers and all the things, but I don't know. It's like these meetings find me. But, I think you just have to have the data. And once you have that data, then it doesn't feel, as this side and that side. But I understand because I really have felt too historically, especially working in an ABA center. I remember one student, he came to us, he was 9, he had very unsafe behavior, had to be staffed too male to him, away from other students because he just engaged in self-injury behavior. But what was wild about that story, and I have some videos of him and Help Me Find My Voice, is that he came to us with an amazing device. It was beautifully put together. He just wasn't using it. And it was like, once we taught him his first whole IEP, I still remember, it was like 10 years ago, but it was just receptive language. It was him taking care of his device and it was requesting. And that is all we worked on. And you could just see this light bulb in this kid. And I mean, a year or two later, I would go with him and his staff members to Dairy Queen. He would order using his device. Aww. I mean, it was like his mom was able to have babysitters. They were able to go to grandma and grandpa's. And it was just like, for him, requesting was this gateway into all this other language. But for him, it was. Yeah. We started with very fringe words that it was like, I do something, I get something. I put something on my device, I take a walk, whatever, trampoline, whatever he liked. But I could just see the growth. And I think once you have all these stories and you see it, you're like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. Like there's so many kids that just don't have a voice because the traditional speech therapy isn't going to reach all of these learners who are really struggling.
Yeah. I completely agree. And that is such an important point, I feel like, for especially SLPs working in an autism program or in a clinic, and also for parents that are starting out maybe with a device or something like that, is that it takes so much longer. And you really have to just be patient. And you have to focus on that connection and that modeling, just modeling all the time, and being a good communication partner. And one thing I tell my SLPs, because we are always like, we just want it all to happen for them, like right now. We just want it all to happen. And sometimes we just have to kind of take a step back and just be there with our students, having that connection with them, and helping them really find their voice through their AAC. And, I think that is just, being patient and know that you're doing the right thing for your student in the long run.
Yes, I love that so much. Such a great conversation, Terri. It's been great talking with you today. Can you tell us where, if people wanted to find out more about you and your work, maybe where they can find you?
Sure. So I do have a Facebook page that I really just got together. It was kind of on the back burner for a while since I opened my practice, but it's Bluebird Speech Therapy and Consulting Services, LLC. They can find it if they search that. They can also search at Terri Smith, SLP. I also have an Instagram page, Bluebird Speech, TX for therapy. And then also my email is bluebirdspeechtherapy@gmail.com. So if anybody wants to reach out to me and talk to me, I would be happy to.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for coming on the show.
All right. Thank you, Rose.
Thanks for listening to Autism Outreach. If you enjoyed the show today, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode full of actionable strategies you can use in your therapy room. Write a review too. That would mean so much to me. I always love hearing from you. Have a specific topic that you want included on a future show? Reach out over on Instagram, ABA Speech by Rose, or visit me at www.abaspeech.org.